Donald Trump, in a striking display of personal power, recently commanded the stage in his ancestral homeland of Scotland. Amidst the solemn skirl of bagpipes, the president hosted the British Prime Minister, who arrived as both a guest and a supplicant within his own sovereign territory. The Prime Minister, reduced to a mere spectator, watched as the president conducted a remarkable press conference, meandering through eclectic topics such as his disdain for wind energy, the design of his ballroom windows, and even the grandeur of Windsor Castle. The day concluded with a dramatic flourish, as the president flew the Prime Minister across Scotland aboard Air Force One to another of his exclusive properties, a vivid demonstration of American influence. The preceding day saw the president welcome the head of the European Commission to his windswept Turnberry links. Her effusive reception, coupled with the presentation of a new trade accord, was perceived by some European observers as a major concession. These events in America's temporary diplomatic hub in southwest Scotland served as a masterclass in how the president leverages his formidable personality and keen perception of others' weaknesses to assert personal dominance and secure significant victories. 6 months into his second term, the president appears to be achieving his objectives across numerous fronts. Globally, he is actively dismantling the established free trading system by forging framework agreements that enshrine his long-held obsession with tariffs. His administration has also deployed stealth bombers internationally to target Iran's nuclear program and successfully extracted pledges for substantial increases in military spending from NATO member states. Domestically, a similar pattern of dominance is evident. The president has compelled legislative bodies into compliance, exerted his ideological influence over prominent academic institutions, coerced private law firms into pro bono work, and weaponized the legal system against his adversaries. Furthermore, he has effectively sealed the southern border, significantly curtailing undocumented migration. This spate of wins marks a departure from his first term and aligns with his promise to supporters of an overwhelming wave of successes. However, given his polarizing nature and the frequent performative aspect of his victories, this current streak warrants close examination. Internationally, a crucial question arises. Are these triumphs genuinely benefiting the American populace or primarily serving his personal agenda? Is his coercive influence over allies and smaller nations a true sign of strength, or merely the behavior of a schoolyard strongman? And what will be the long-term repercussions of these perceived wins, years after the fleeting thrill of a great deal headline fades? The very alliances that have underpinned America's superpower status seem particularly vulnerable. The ultimate global tests of the president's power will undeniably manifest in his approach to 3 critical issues highlighted during his Scottish visit: the escalating humanitarian crisis in Gaza, the protracted conflict in Ukraine, and international trade relations. Remarkably, the president demonstrated surprising shifts in tone regarding both Gaza and Ukraine during his recent public remarks. Responding to harrowing footage of severely malnourished children in Gaza, he publicly contradicted an allied prime minister's claim of no starvation in the enclave following months of military action. "We have to get the kids fed," the president declared, pledging to establish food distribution centers to alleviate the growing famine. However, he offered scant details on the practical implementation of such an initiative within a war zone where civilians have tragically lost their lives while queuing for sustenance. He also overlooked any potential national involvement in the aid crisis, particularly difficulties faced by certain support programs that bypassed expert international bodies. It remains to be seen if the president's commitment represents a genuine policy pivot, potentially leading him to challenge a leader who has repeatedly resisted international pressure and complicated the president's aspiration to be perceived as a peacemaker. It is conceivable that, as occurred after chemical weapons attacks in Syria in 2017, the president was genuinely moved by the heartbreaking images of suffering children. Yet, a leader with acute political acumen might also have calculated that escalating outrage toward a key ally could lead to shared culpability for the unfolding tragedy. This cynical perspective is bolstered by his past suggestion that Gaza's residents should relocate to facilitate the creation of a Middle East Riviera beach resort. Moreover, the significant reduction in foreign aid budgets under his administration suggests the dire situation in Gaza is not an isolated incident. The second crucial test of the president's global power will undoubtedly unfold in Ukraine. He recently expressed growing frustration with the Russian president's refusal to accept his generous suggestions for a peace settlement in Ukraine, dramatically shortening his previous 50-day deadline for action to a mere 10 to 12 days. "We have such nice conversations, such respectful and nice conversations," the president remarked, and then people die the following night. Should the president genuinely transition from conciliation to punitive measures against Russia, he possesses the means to inflict significant economic pain, particularly through secondary sanctions targeting Moscow's vital oil exports, which bankroll its military efforts. However, this carries immense geopolitical risk. Such a move would necessitate directly confronting major powers like India and China, potentially triggering severe global economic repercussions. Concurrently, while the president was in Scotland, his trade negotiators were engaged in high-level discussions with a major Asian power in Sweden, talks that could yield another win for his tariff-centric strategy and potentially culminate in a presidential visit to the Asian capital later this year. The question then becomes, is he truly prepared to jeopardize these interests for Ukraine, a nation he believes has already received excessive foreign assistance? A decisive move against the Russian leader in the coming days, one that could also impact the Asian power and even run counter to the president's own political calculations, would signal a willingness not just to assert authority over European allies, but to confront the world's most formidable leaders. Conversely, a failure to act decisively would validate critics who view the president's irritation with the Russian leader as less about Ukraine's suffering and more about the personal embarrassment of his perceived peace efforts being thwarted. On the surface, the president seemingly achieved a genuine victory against the European bloc in the recent trade agreement, a triumph for his America First trade policies which aim to reverse decades of perceived exploitation by international partners and revitalize domestic manufacturing. The European Union opted against leveraging its substantial economic might to inflict damage on the American economy. Instead, it consented to a deal that includes a 15% tariff on European exports. The backlash from some quarters was immediate and fierce. A prominent French political figure publicly lamented the agreement as a submission of a free alliance. However, others interpreted the European response as pragmatism rather than capitulation. It is increasingly clear that tariffs are a core tenet of the president's economic philosophy, evidenced by similar levies incorporated into recent trade deals with other nations. While Europe's already sluggish economic growth will inevitably be impacted, a full-blown trade war would undoubtedly be far more detrimental. As a leading figure in the German Chemical Industry Association succinctly put it, those who expect a hurricane are grateful for a storm. The president's assertion that the EU agreement constitutes the biggest deal ever is characteristic hyperbole. The concise framework is far from a detailed agreement, which could take years of negotiation and thousands of pages to fully articulate. This appears to be a classic instance of the president spinning a minor breakthrough into a gargantuan victory. The framework announcement from the executive branch is notably sparse and laden with conditional language. Upon closer inspection, it remains unclear precisely what the European Union has genuinely conceded. There is no clear indication that the Europeans have yielded to American demands regarding the acceptance of hormone-treated beef or the easing of regulations for American technology firms. European leaders, it seems, are playing a long game. A trade war with the president might have sabotaged their persistent efforts to prevent the rupture of the transatlantic alliance, which included a commitment for allied nations to raise defense spending to 5% by 2035 during his previous transatlantic trip. It may also be no coincidence that the president's shift in approach on Ukraine and Gaza, bringing him closer to two critical European foreign policy priorities, occurred just hours after the European Union's concessions in the trade agreement. The president's victories are often overt and direct. European strategies are typically more nuanced. The British Prime Minister is employing a similar strategic approach. His willingness to set aside political decorum whenever he meets the president has cultivated a working relationship and secured a more favorable 10% tariff rate, better than that imposed on the European Union. Ultimately, the president's binary worldview, wherein he must always emerge victorious and the opposing side must lose, is inevitably bound to alienate some of America's staunchest allies. In the context of his America First doctrine, which seeks to leverage American might against smaller nations, regardless of whether they are allies or adversaries, this alienation may seem inconsequential. However, the system of U.S. alliances and its leadership of like-minded democracies have been fundamental to Washington's global power since the end of the Second World War. And at times, the nation undeniably needs its friends, as demonstrated following the tragic events of September 11, 2001. The president is rapidly depleting America's soft power at an alarming rate. As some of America's traditional allies contemplate closer ties with a major Asian power, there are clear indications that the president's transactional approach could inflict lasting damage. A former foreign policy official from a previous administration recently articulated that the current leadership is accelerating a future where nations opt out of the existing American-led international order or construct a new one that would be antagonistic to American interests. Moreover, it is not even clear that many of the president's wins will genuinely enhance domestic security. After all, by imposing a 15% tariff on European goods, the president has effectively levied yet another consumption tax on American citizens. As a prominent European business leader commented, "It's enough